Good evening and welcome to CNN Money Switzerland. I'm Hannah Wise with the main news headlines. And this Thursday, the Swiss government has been outlining how we'll all get back to work and school while dealing with the coronavirus outbreak. And the loosening of restrictions is to be done in 3 stages. Let me break it down for you. On the 27th of April, the Federal Council intends to ease measures on businesses where there is only a low level of direct contact. It means all medical procedures can resume, including things like physiotherapy and dentistry. Hairdressers, florists, DIY stores and garden centres will reopen. Phase 2 will start on May the 11th. On that date, school for children of compulsory school age, shops and markets will reopen. A further decision on Phase 2 will be made on the 29th of April. Phase 3 will see upper secondary schools and other higher education institutions open on the 8th of June. At the same time, museums, libraries and zoos may reopen. The Federal Council will take a decision at the end of May on whether it needs to readapt these plans. A decision on large-scale events will be allowed to go ahead. That will be taken at one of its next meetings. Well, earlier, I spoke to Sami CHAAR, who is Chief Economist at Lombard Odier, about the pitfalls and challenges of reopening an economy.
So at some point, you have to take the risk to reopen in a very, very cautious way. And I would say, yes, there is a risk, but there is a good benchmark to follow, which is basically what is happening in Asia. Asia has reopened with a bit of weeks of advance versus Europe, and Europe will reopen perhaps with a bit of advance versus the US. But if what we see from the Asian example is a success, i.e. they managed to reopen, they continue to contain the second wave, well, it does mean that we have some sort of a process, a roadmap for us to reopen in a relatively safe way, despite the risk of this second wave.
The one thing that you can't see, though, is how long that this COVID-19 hangover is going to last into the economy. I mean, sure, we can reopen things, but what about social distancing? I mean, that's not going to go away, some Harvard business people think, until 2022. That's years away. How long do you think this hangover will last?
Well, again, using not theoretical assumptions, but what is really happening on the ground in Asia, what we can see is that when you open up your economy, things tend to normalize a little bit faster than what we can fear. So we look at daily data in China, we look at daily data in South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, even Thailand, Hong Kong. And what you see is that basically you recover pretty quickly in certain segments of the economies, 70 to 80% of the supply and demand trends we were in before the COVID. So I would say things can get back to normal. Again, not extremely quick.
But you highlighted that there's 30% of the economy which will not be able to. What is that? Where are we seeing that 30%?
Indeed, this is going to take a bit more time. So let's say that some segments of the economies will, recover relatively swiftly in the rest of 2020. So I would say, some manufacturing activities, some imports and exports dynamics, people getting, let's say, pollution within a country, migration, these kind of things like housing transactions, these kind of things can start normalizing, I would say, and how companies and supply chains start operating. What will take more time is really obviously tourism, flights, cinemas, things where you have a bigger crowd. So perhaps again, I think what's interesting is that for now we have maintained to contain most of the damage in the first half of the year, because the duration of this crisis is absolutely key to avoid long-term consequences. And for now, I would say it's not one, but it is moving in the right direction. So it's an important element to keep in mind.
What are some of the things that we possibly can't see or aren't talking about, some of the challenges that are out there? I mean, today, Barry Callebaut said that it tapped into its €1 billion credit facility because it was concerned that it wouldn't be able to at a later date. Are these some of the issues that we're going to start to see for companies coming out?
Yes, I mean, again, the duration of the crisis is key here. As long as you have a credit stress or employment stress that lasts, let's say, 2 months and no more, you don't need to suffer long-term consequences. But if we start, if the damage starts fueling into the second half of the year, because a lot of activities cannot reopen more decisively, well, then indeed, the stress, the funding stress, the financial stress, and the income stress for companies not able to do business or people losing their job is going to start being an issue. There again, let's watch as what's going on in Asia. For now, they avoided a massive uncontrolled default cycle. They've avoided unemployment spiraling out of control. So there is a good chance that we continue to, let's say, micromanage our economies to get through this and get more comfort as we open up. But very clearly, we're not going to return to normal before, at least in the best case, late 2021.
Doctors Without Borders here in Switzerland is dealing with its biggest ever operation due to COVID-19. According to the director of the program, most help isn't actually needed in Ticino, but in Western Switzerland, where underprivileged people are slipping through the cracks, as Olivia Chang found out.
So where MSF is seeing the greatest need for COVID-19 response is in Geneva and Lausanne. We've been called by the University Hospital in Geneva in order to help them in responding to the needs of the underprivileged people in Geneva. So we set up a mobile team with the supervision of the University Hospital in order to go to visit those people in shelters and other places in Geneva to help them in the medical part of the response. Well, we see people who've been discharged from the hospital. We see people who are suspected but not tested, and we see also people who are tested positive but with no symptoms. So this is where most people are in shelters, most people are homeless, and this is where we are called and where the mobile team goes in order to consult people and see what is the health state and eventually refer those people to the hospital if needed.
You just told me you started in Geneva and Lausanne where you see some of the greatest need. Does MSF have plans to venture into the German-speaking territory of Switzerland or Italian-speaking where there are also a huge number of cases?
Yes, indeed. We started off in Geneva, then Lausanne. We were in touch with the Italian part of Switzerland where we consider needs are not big enough for MSF to respond. But however, we will go next week to the German part of Switzerland in Zurich and Basel in order to assess with our people over there the situation and eventually respond to the needs, if not covered.
How big would you say the current Doctors Without Borders team in Switzerland is? And in your experience, is this one of the biggest operations that the association has ever deployed?
That's for MSF Switzerland. It's probably the biggest operation in the country. We had previously 2 operations, one in Zurich and one in Fribourg for homeless people, but this is the biggest, and we've got 7 medical people responding to the epidemic here in Geneva, and we will have 2 nurses responding in Lausanne. So all in all, this operation is the biggest for MSF Switzerland in the country, yes.
First, it was Swatch, then Rolex, and 4 other major watch companies that pulled out of Basel World, leaving the future of one of the world's premier luxury watch fairs hanging in the balance. LVMH Group have yet to take a decision on this, but Jean-Christophe Babin, who is CEO of Bulgari, said the last defections could leave no choice for the owners but to end it.
So what's left of Basel today? Very little. As many brands had left before, the anchor brand have left. So we are basically left with LVMH brands. Great brands.
But is LVMH going to stay or also pulling out?
It's a decision we're going to take very quickly. But I think even if we were willing to stay, we probably couldn't stay because as it is, with the brands left, the cost of Basel for MCH, I think that financially MCH will get, unfortunately, in big trouble. And I'm not sure that even if the regional brands would confirm, which is very uncertain, the Basel fair could move on. So to me, what has happened yesterday has been really the end of Basel.
Well, Baban goes on to say that if there were to be one big united Swiss fair in 2021, he would want to be part of it. And you can watch that full interview by checking out our website, cnnmoney.ch. Now, could the coronavirus mean an end to the 8-hour working day? Well, certainly the world finds itself in an unprecedented work from home experiment during the pandemic. And whether we continue to work from 9 to 5 will largely depend on the shape of the recovery. This is according to the World Economic Forum.
If we're talking about a sort of, V-shaped recovery, as economists would refer to it, if we're talking about a relatively rapid return to the previous sort of speed with which businesses are having to work, then I think you're probably looking at a situation where we're talking about more work than ever before as people return to the workplace, whether that is physically or whether that's remote work. And so more hours than before. And if we're talking about a slower return to work, we may be talking on average about a lower number of hours, but we might actually be looking at a very bifurcated sort of workforce where some people will continue to have lower amounts of work because their recovery is slower than we want it to be. And other people, because they're at the front lines of the type of work that has to be done, they're actually seeing a lot of work and more hours than before. So I think the conversations that we may have been having about, the 4-day work week in the type of context we were in December 2019, those conversations will take on a very, very different nuance today, because we're talking about responding to the recovery from this current sort of economic crisis.
Can you talk to me about certain industries or sectors that you think are more likely to break away from this mold of defined hours much easier?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind there is that we shouldn't forget that there are a lot of workers in what are considered essential roles that actually are working much harder than before in the midst of this current pandemic. So whether that is people who are working in grocery stores, or obviously healthcare workers, people who are working in logistics and supply chain, there are a lot of people that are actually in those essential roles that are working already incredibly, long hours in this current moment and keeping very vital parts of the economy going. That said, at the same time, it's very clear that there are certain sectors which require, face-to-face interaction, where essentially the lockdown means that they are not currently at work. And depending on the shape of the pandemic and depending on the nature with which countries decide to open up, we could be looking at periods of a stop-start. We could be looking at a period where there is sort of a return to some of those physical workplaces, especially for sectors where, for example, if you look at sort of, the retail sector, you're looking at a short-term return, and then you're looking at sort of, again, a sort of partial lockdown, then you're looking at sort of a short-term return again. And yet for most of the sort of, service workers in the white-collar workforce, that may not be a concern, because lockdown or not, they always have the ability to be able to work remotely. So I think it's going to depend very much by sector, and at the same time, it's going to depend very much on the shape of the recovery and the shape of the response to the pandemic. So that's a pretty complex matrix that we will end up with.
Too early to rule out the possibility of seeing more 4-day work weeks emerge out of this crisis?
I think there's certainly some possibility that some economies may choose to organize themselves that way in specific sectors to preserve as many jobs as possible. I think that idea of sort of sharing work hours differently, if we look back at what happened in a good 80 years ago, in part, the idea of a weekend and of a 5-day work week emerged out of a crisis, right? And so certainly there are some economies that may choose to organize themselves in that way. But I think in many cases, what we're talking about is fairly rapid responses to a very fast-moving economic environment. And so I think we're still it's still quite a long ways off to see that kind of response coming through.
Coronavirus-themed cyber threats have continued to rise as the outbreak has continued. Companies, individuals, even hospitals are finding themselves unprepared for this unexpected situation. In this special digital report, CNN Money Switzerland discovers that when it comes to hospitals, the consequences on patients can be devastating.
The Melanie website has, for the last 2 weeks, they have listed every 3 days a warning, which is incredible compared to like last half years where they have one warning. So it's an incredible situation.
Whenever there's something new, something exceptional happening, like if there's another accident or an earthquake, this is an increase in cybercrime on all ranges. History tells us that cybercriminals are very fast in adapting to new opportunities, say advances in technology or some events much faster than defenders, and naturally they take advantage of that.
These unexpected circumstances lead to new vulnerabilities. People act different, people have a different mindset, they take more risks, hence there is more opportunities for attackers, particularly for organized crime that likes to make money by stealing secrets or resources. There's just more opportunity now because people act differently.
From my personal experience, early January, I got the first offers to buy some vaccine that's very effective against COVID. Then I got offers for masks and everything like this. So scams and phishing is very effective. So they take advantage of it. Now, this is an exceptional period. People are very curious. You want to know the latest news about your area, about your neighbors, about your industry and stuff like this. And there will be lots of offerings, and there are lots of offerings, email scams that take advantage of it. And when you follow those news or download the latest tools and so on, you get infected.
Because you set up new infrastructure, it might also be that you have misconfigured systems, and hence they exploit misconfigurations. It's very often the case. And then there might be very sophisticated setups with Trojan horses, but these are not for the regular small medium enterprise. These are more for critical infrastructure providers, banks, people with highly confidential information.
There has been a call from a very famous security researcher on Twitter recently saying to the criminal gangs, hey, stop invading or infecting hospitals with COVID, with ransomware, because they have lots of other things to do. So it's lots of malware. Some of the processes are automated. They do not differentiate between good and bad targets.
That can be devastating, absolutely devastating. I mean, I'm not talking about every hospital, but there is plenty of hospitals that haven't separated the normal office infrastructure from the medical infrastructure well enough. So if you attack the office infrastructure, you can go to medical infrastructure, the medical systems, but also already having encryption, or like, as you say, ransomware. If you encrypt the patient records, doctors don't know what is the history of the patients, and they can't act. It's absolutely devastating. And you have to pay immediately because there is no minute to be lost. If lives are at stake, of course a hospital will pay immediately the ransom. Well, in circumstances like this, where you quickly need to set up new systems, people tend to rush into hasty actions. They take a system they've never used before, they use it now, they don't know how to configure it. Hence there is misconfigurations. Then there is negligence because they just work too fast. Then there is people start to work around. You know, if you feel pressure to deliver, you have a system that doesn't work or perform. You know, you have an immense load on these IT systems. You see that with banks as well. There is companies that don't have enough VPN licenses. They don't have enough secure communication channel licenses. They might have for 10% of the employees, but not for 90 or 99% of the employees these licenses. And you see that even with very reputed companies like big banks, you see that they have way too little resources to cope and with the situation where everyone wants to work from home. On a complicated but secure system. So simplicity is key. Use the most simple tools and that combine security with simplicity. So
have a secured machine, have the latest security updates, do not bypass or delay security updates, have security tools running on it like antivirus and stuff like this. There's no such thing as 100% protection, but the most important is your common sense. So if you get some offers or whatever, ask yourself, why the heck did I win 10 millions in the lottery and never ever participated? So this is no different than in the physical world. Cyber criminals, they go for greed and vanity, and if you fall for that, there's no technology that can protect you from that.
Well, that's you all up to date from us here at CNN Money Switzerland. Remember, everything is available on our website, cnnmoney.ch. We'll be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.